Again, somebody who grew up in France. He did get his master's in computer sciences, but then he focused his career on sales, and that's where his history went through all the major brands and companies in the world. And then he became really fascinated by the human mind. How do things work? Why do people buy stuff, etc. And he started a company called SalesBrain, where he's still working now as the Chief Neuromarketing Officer. Are there more Chief Neuromarketing Officers in the world?
I don't know. I'm going to do a couple.
I haven't ever heard of it, but
Somebody's got to do it.
yeah, somebody has to do it first. Okay. So you ready for your presentation?
I am.
Then I won't take any more time. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Mr. Patrick Renvoise.
Good afternoon, and before I start, I just wanted to say I didn't know what I was going to find in Amsterdam for this conference. Yes? Move it up, she's saying. I know that I've been passionate about the brain because I've dedicated the last 15 years of my life to better understand the brain and more importantly, to see what we needed to do differently in business if we really want to be effective in sales and marketing. So I've been very passionate about this thing here, and I thought I was one of the only ones. But when I came to Amsterdam, I came to realize that I am not the only one. A few other people have that disease. And I was very pleased to see that there is a small ecosystem of companies that are doing some kind of work around the neuromarketing concept so that I don't feel so lonely. So I'm leaving Amsterdam this afternoon, but I feel much better because, again, I'm not the only nutcase who is really worried about the brain, right? So the subject of my talk is about talking a little bit about the implication of neuromarketing in this business. And I'd like to give a very quick overview of the differences that I see between marketing, neuromarketing, and a new branch or a sub-branch of marketing, which for lack of a better word, I'm going to call applied neuromarketing. So let me talk very briefly about what is traditional marketing. Okay, that's all right. So in traditional marketing, here is what you do. You ask your customers or your prospects, what do you want, right? And then you carefully listen to their answers, and hopefully you're going to build product, you're going to develop a business strategy based on their answers. But there is a fundamental flaw with that problem. In fact, it's the subject of a number of books, and if you haven't read that book, I would really recommend that you read it. I don't know if anybody has heard about Gerald Zaltman. Zaltman wrote a book a few years ago called How Customers Think, and Zaltman is a professor of marketing at Harvard. And Zaltman is saying marketing does not work. And he teaches it in one of the best schools in the world. And he says marketing does not work. Why? Because when you ask your customers what do you want, the reality is they don't know. So, I mean, a lot of companies, they don't even do marketing, but the ones who do marketing most likely are not doing it right because at the end of the day, our customers, they don't really know what they want. So neuromarketing is slightly different. In neuromarketing, you ask your customers what do you want, but you're not going to trust what they say because they don't know. Instead, you're going to look at some kind of variation in their behavior or their physiology. And there are different techniques that everybody agrees now are the heart of what neuromarketing is. One of those techniques is facial decoding. In other words, you're going to look at the face of your customers, and because their face is obviously controlled, the muscles on their face, and most people have about 60 active muscles when they express expressions on their face, right? Because this control of the muscle is somewhat subconscious, we can read their emotion based on how their muscles contract, and then we can deduct what they are really telling you. So for example, we can deduct if they're lying, if they are excited, if they are anxious, etc. Another technique is eye tracking. I'm not going to expand on this, everybody knows what it is. A third one is voice analysis, whereby we're going to measure the differences in tone of voice, and with very sophisticated software analysis, we can deduct what kind of emotional state those people are. I mean, this technology was originally developed by the CIA to find out if people are lying. So they used this to interrogate terrorists. Another technique is the famous skin conductance, where you measure the change of electrical properties of the skin. You're also going to measure the heart rate of the person, the blood pressure, and other parameters. And the most modern ones, as you know, are, we've been talking about EEG, and the last one is fMRI. So this is the world of neuromarketing as I see it today, right? So it's all good, we can see a lot of interesting stuff, but here is how it works. Or not but here is typically how it works. So this is the brain of your customer, or his heart, or some kind of body part, right? And the first thing you need to do is you need to do capture. So as we heard in the previous lecture, this capture very often is a very complicated task because the signals are noisy, etc. So you have to do a number of signal processing to really extract the meaning of the data. Then you run into what people have called a black box. And this is where people are creating very sophisticated software analysis to deduct from the signal that they have measured some kind of interesting emotional state, or they want to, they want to extract the meaning of what those people have experienced. And in the case of MRIs, from these different areas of neurons that are firing, right, we're trying to deduct really how people feel. Or because we know that certain areas of the brain are specialized in certain treatments, we know that if people are using that area of their brain, then they must be thinking or doing something which we ought to predict. Now, a lot of these black boxes are just what they are called. In other words, they are black boxes and people don't really want to know. They don't want you to know what they put in their black boxes to extract the meaning. Right? And then from that, so you'll generate your findings. And your findings generally are, well, at that moment I felt that my patient was sad. Or at that moment the consumer or the patient was happy. And then the promise of neuromarketing, and it's still one of the big elements that's missing, is that at the end of the day, getting those findings is great, but how can you create business actions based on that? In other words, it's all good to figure out that your customer is happy or unhappy, etc. Then it takes another leap of faith to really make a smart business decision as to what do you need to change in your sales and marketing strategy if you want to be more effective. So just to give you an idea of what I'm trying to get to is that although this promise of neuromarketing is almost too good to be true, there are limits in the whole business model that we can build around neuromarketing. And one of the limits is it protectable? In other words, what do you do when you have a black box to make sure that nobody else copies your black box? So people don't want to open up their black box, and that creates a whole lot of issues. One of them is the ethical issue. So if I don't know what there is in your black box, how do I know that I'm not going to try to manipulate you? Another issue of neuromarketing is it is not applicable to B2B. Because see, if I'm going to try to sell you an airplane, the engineer who's going to decide whether or not he wants to buy my airplane is probably not going to be willing to have his head scanned, right? Either in an MRI or in an EEG. So neuromarketing is not applicable to B2B. Is it affordable? So we can talk about the cost. Now, of course, the costs are dropping, but it's still fairly expensive. Now, can you do the test in real time? No, you cannot. In other words, if I wanted to know right away if you're interested by my brain, if I want to sell you this brain, right? I'm not going to get the answer instantly. I'm going to have to schedule an appointment. We're going to have to take a taxi. I'm going to take you to an MRI center, and then I'm going to scan your brain, and I'm going to go through the signal processing, then I'm going to do the, black box analysis, and then I'm going to draw a business decision, and then maybe I need to paint this brain in green to make it more attractive to me.
Your brain would say it's DS.
So it's not real time. It takes time, right? Now, is it accessible? What I mean by this is, does the average human being understand what we're talking about? In other words, neuroscience right now is still getting out of the labs, and if you don't have a PhD in neuroscience, most likely you're not understanding what everybody else is saying. Because it's a world by itself. In fact, in the world of neuromarketing, you have two important words. One is neuro, which means doctors who have studied the brain, right? And then you have another world, which is marketing. And there is very little intersection of these two areas, right? So the people that are coming to neuromarketing right now, I would say half of them are coming there from the neuroscientific background, and they have very little knowledge of marketing. And the other half has a lot of knowledge on marketing, but very little knowledge about neuroscience. So it's not an accessible science. And then finally, at the end of the day, what do you do if you're a business person to take actions to make the whole thing work and to change something about your business strategy so that hopefully you can sell more. So these are the limits of neuromarketing today. And to give you an example, I'd like to go back to these studies. Is everybody familiar with this study? This is the study that everybody's talking about, right? It's a study that was ordered at the University of Baylor in Texas. And they put 67 consumers inside an fMRI machine, and they looked at their brain when people were actually drinking and testing Pepsi or Coke. And then at different amount of time, they were telling them, drinking this, that. And here is the interesting finding, right? And I'm sure you know the story, but I'm still going to tell it to you in 2 seconds. Here is what happens. Coke outsells Pepsi by a factor of 3 or 4. In other words, for every can of Coke sold in the world, or for every can of Pepsi sold in the world, Coca-Cola sells 3 to 4 cans. So that in itself is not surprising. Why? Because Coke was the original. They were the first one. They invented that drink, right? But what's really amazing, though, is that when people don't know what they drink, when you do a double-blind test, guess what? People prefer Pepsi. And they prefer Pepsi by a large margin. So it doesn't make sense. We know people prefer Pepsi, but when they go to the store, instead of buying the Pepsi, they buy the Coke. So that's why they did that study. That study, 67 consumers again, cost about $275,000. I'm going to give you an idea of the results that they found. That's the results that they found. Now imagine you're the VP of marketing at Pepsi-Cola. This costs you $275,000. What do you do with this? By the way, there is only one thing you should be doing at this point. There is only one smart thing you should be doing if you're the VP of marketing at Pepsi. What is that one thing you should be doing? Yeah, you could ask a professional, but the answer is going to give you is not going to be that much better than this. Anybody got a guess? Yes?
Tell everybody about this stuff.
Yeah, you can tell them, but it's still not going to help you sell more Pepsi, right? Because if you're the VP of marketing at Pepsi, you want to sell more Pepsi. So what should you be doing? Well, the only thing you should be doing is get a job with Coke. Because there is no way you're going to be able to override that natural preference. I mean, over time it might work, but you need to build a different marketing strategy. What's happening is it's all the effect of branding, right? With the millions of dollars, the billions of dollars that Coke has invested, it's as if they had bought a little space in your brain so that when you think cola drink, you think Coke. And there's only one brand in there, right? But that very first study in 2004 is really the study that started the whole field of neuromarketing. If it was not for that study, I don't think that a lot of us would be here today. So you see, the problem is it's not actionable. It's for the VP of marketing, it is very hard now to make business changes based on getting these results. So what I'd like to talk about now is a new branch or a sub-branch of neuromarketing, which again I'm going to call applied neuromarketing. And in applied neuromarketing, the idea is we're going to look at how various stimulus in the brain provide a certain response. And then we're going to build a model of what it takes to help people to say yes. So we're going to build a model of predictability. So the model of predictability that I've been working on for almost 14 years now is based on the triune model of the brain. Yesterday we had Emma talk about the system 1, system 2 brain, the limbic system and the neocortex. I'm using a brain at 3 levels, but if you put the orange one with the yellow one, it would be 2 levels, right? It's the same. But the idea is, before people decide, or when they decide, they don't use one brain, they use 3 brains. And the first section of the brain is the outside part, it's called the neocortex. And if you think about it, the job of the neocortex is really to process rational information. It's what makes us uniquely human, and that's why we're called Homo sapiens. It means the one who think, because we think more than any other species on Earth. The second level in the brain is called the middle brain, and it's the brain that's much more interested in processing emotions and generating emotions. And the third level in the brain is called the reptilian brain. It's also called the old brain. Sometimes people miscall it the limbic system. Sometimes people call it the first brain. Doesn't matter what you call it, because that deep inside our brain is this very old structure of the brain, and that brain is responsible for instinct. It's the brain that's, again, Emma was calling the system 1 brain. It's the brain that is either on or off. It's awake or asleep. It's a brain that is completely binary. It's also called the pre-verbal brain. It does not even understand words. Right? And neuroscientists people like Antonio Damasio, you may have heard of him, people like Joseph Ledoux, they tell us that these lower levels of the brain have a greater impact on the decision than the higher levels of the brain. They even tell us that the impact of the reptilian brain on the neocortex is greater than the impact of the neocortex on the reptilian brain. So what I've done is, I created a little model of how that reptilian brain can be triggered, what kind of stimulus get to that brain, and then from that we have deducted a whole business model of what people need to do if they want to impact that lower level of the brain. So what stimulates the reptilian brain? Well, we found in the medical literature that there are only 6 stimuli that can get to that brain. A lot of these are things that have been known for a long time, and I'm going to review them one by one rather quickly. So the first one is self-centered. And self-centered, what does that mean? Well, that means the reptilian brain is selfish. It's all about me, me, me. Let me give you an example of that, and I'm going to need a little guinea pig. So Rob, I have a bad news. You're going to get bit by a snake, right?
Why not? Right.
So imagine Rob is going to get bit by a snake. So let's look at the dialogue inside his brain, right? First, his neocortex is going to go, snake, potential death. At this time of day, in Amsterdam traffic, with the snow falling out, it's going to take at least an hour and a half to get me to a hospital. And the probability that they will have the right antidote is 12.3%. Okay? So he goes rationally about what happened. Then his middle brain is really processing his emotion, right? So what kind of emotion do you think he's experiencing at that moment? Fear. Fear, right? He's really scared. And his reptilian brain goes, snake, potential death, get out. In fact, his reptilian brain will tell him to move away from the snake even before he knows it's a snake. See, the reptilian brain is a brain of reflexes. It takes approximately 2 milliseconds for his reptilian brain to get out. When it takes about half a second for his neocortex to say there is a snake, there is danger, I need to move out. Right? Now, experts on the role of evolution in the brain, they tell us that speed is more important for survival than smarts. In other words, a fly outsmarts us, not based on the quality of its decision, right? And the fly has about 200,000 neurons in our brain, so it's not a very intelligent animal. But the fly survives because we can catch it. It doesn't make smart decisions, but it makes those decisions fast, right? So here's what happens is we human beings, we make decisions very quickly. Very often we make this decision at a subconscious level. We're not even aware that we've made a decision, right? And then we're going to take a long, long time to rationalize the decision later on. Okay? So that's what's happening in your brain. Let's look at what happens in Salim's brain now as he's witnessing the same event, right? So Salim's neocortex goes, Rob, snake, potential death. Oh, poor guy. At this time of day, with the snow out there, it's going to take at least an hour and a half to take him to the hospital. No, it's because they both know the same thing about snakes. They both go through the same cognitive processing about that particular event, right? Then Salim's middle brain goes, Rob, snake, poor guy. I mean, he has a little built-in compassion in him, right? So the emotion that he's going to feel is probably a little bit of sadness, a little bit of concern. And that's a very unique human emotion because not every animal is compassionate, right? I mean, this guy is scared to death. This guy is concerned. It's not the same emotion. It's not the same intensity. But do you know what Salim's reptilian brain says? Salim reptilian goes, snake, Rob, potential death. So what? I mean, God, it's not me. Why? Because his reptilian brain is wired to worry only about one animal, and that animal is called Salim. Right? So, and that's how selfish we really are. So without a stimulus that is self-centered, the reptilian brain cannot balance. So let me show you a little ad that illustrates this point. And I just wanted also to add that a very famous neuroscientist in the US called Robert Ornstein said that the reptilian brain is the organ of the 4 Fs. So do you know what are the 4 Fs that are necessary for survival? What are the 4 Fs that are necessary for survival? English words. Food, right? You need it a couple times a day. What else? Fear is actually the 5th F. Fear is the emotion that we feel that forces us to get the food. In other words, it's because we are afraid of starvation that we wake up every day and we go to work. If we did not feel that fear, we would all die because we wouldn't care, right? But fear is the underlying emotion that pushes us to move, to do something about it. The first F is food. The second F is fight. If I see a small animal, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to kill it, then I can steal its territory and I can eat it, right? And the third F is, so feed, fight, flight, right? It's the opposite response of fight. In other words, if I see a big lion, I'm not going to fight it, I'm going to run away. And the last F is feed, fight, flight.
Sex with that.
That's right. He said sexual reproduction because he was a very polite guy. You guys are kind of slow. The afternoon on the Friday. All right. So let me show you a short video that illustrates this concept. We need to put the volume up. Thank you.
Imagine me and you and me. No matter how they toss the dice, it had to be. The only one for me is you, and you for me. So happy together.
Right, and that's how selfish the return is graded. I did that because I saw a lot of people yesterday.
Qué malo, el chico.
No, more seriously, here's an example of a printed ad where they use that stimulus of self-centered. See, they tell you, would you rely on any business strategy before seeing that it works? Now, did you notice something very smart that they did here? Look at where is that picture shot from. It's the guy who's going to, jump with a bungee. But where is that picture shot from? From his perspective, right? So your brain responds to that because your reptilian brain, which is not a very smart brain, it believes that you're the guy there standing on the bridge. So they create that emotion artificially by making it completely self-centered, right? Okay, the second stimulus is contrast. Contrast, what does that mean? Well, if you take a frog and put a frog in boiling water, what would happen? It would jump out because the contrast between the room temperature and the boiling water is going to happen. Now, if you take the same frog and put it in lukewarm water, the frog is happy, right? But you know what happens if you slowly heat up the water underneath the frog? A lot of them would die. Not all of them, but most of them would die. In other words, the absence of contrast would prevent the frog reptilian brain to make the decision to jump. In other words, no contrast, no decision, right? So let me show you an ad which uses contrast as a way to get to your reptilian brain.
I can't go more than a few hours without a cigarette.
I can't go more than a few feet without the oxygen tank.
I tried to stop, and I put on 5 pounds. I've lost 25 pounds.
I have trouble getting out of bed without a smoke, man.
I have trouble getting out of bed. No, I don't think I can quit.
I don't think I can operate.
So could everybody see the contrast in this ad, right? So the reason why this ad is working is that because it creates that constant contrast between somebody who's sick, who has cancer, and somebody who cannot quit. The next ad is a printed ad just to show contrast. How strong can a kid's bone get exactly? This is an ad for yogurt. You can see the contrast here, right? You can see a small leg, kid's leg, and all right, very good. The next stimulus is tangible. Tangible, what does that mean? That means the reptilian brain does not understand intangible concept. The reptilian brain is a brain that's approximately 500 million years old, and experts also call the reptilian brain the pre-verbal brain. Why do they call it the pre-verbal brain? Because how long do you think we've been using words as a way to communicate? How old are words? How much? Actually, written words are about 8 to 10,000, and spoken words are about 20,000 years old. Homo sapiens, by the way, happens to be about 200,000 years old, right? So we've been using words only for 10% of the existence of Homo sapiens. But at the scale of the reptilian brain, this is still nothing, because the reptilian brain is 500 million years old. It's very, very old. Dinosaurs have reptilian brains, right? Anything that has vertebrae, by the way, has a spine. And if you think about it, the brain is just the termination of that spine, right? So anything that has vertebrae has a reptilian brain. As a result, the reptilian brain does not understand things like, oh, we have an easy-to-use, integrated, scalable, modular architecture of various modules that we provide the end user with. No, the reptilian brain does not understand any of that. Why? Because that's not tangible. That is too intangible. Right? The reptilian brain understands yellow banana, because that's tangible. So let me show you a small ad. Hold on, let me prep you on this ad before I start. So this is an ad for an energy bar. It's a power bar. And the center of their value proposition, the core of their value proposition is their energy bar provides more energy or extra energy. And I want you to see how they are conveying that concept of extra energy, and they make it very tangible so that even your reptilian brain can understand it. So I'm going to prep you. They're going to use humor to get to your reptilian brain. And you're going to see a guy who's jogging, and he's stretching his legs on his car. Right? So let's see how they are making that value proposition of extra energy more tangible. Everybody got it? Right? You see how that experience of extra energy means something tangible for you? You lose your car. Now here's another example in a printed ad. This is an ad for Mr. Clean. Did you see how they made their value proposition become more tangible? Right? It's clear for everybody? See, it doesn't even need words, right? Okay, the next stimulus is beginning and end. What does that mean? Well, this is the famous recency effect, right? In other words, the brain remembers things at the beginning of an interaction, remembers things at the end, but it forgets pretty much anything in between. So there is a very famous curve that was discovered about 60 years ago. And the curve says that if this is your attention retention depending on time, and it doesn't matter what time is, time could be one lifetime, it can be 1 hour with a client, it can be 5 minutes on the phone with somebody, it doesn't matter. That curve works at any frequency. The curve is always the same, and it's that curve, right? In fact, if you guys are old enough and you had several cars, everybody can remember their first car. And you guys remember your first car? Yes? Do you remember your last car? The one you drive every day, right? Pretty easy. And you notice that it's slightly harder to remember your second car than it is to remember the first one, although it is sooner in time. And then this is the last car you've sold. And science has demonstrated that if you had 10 cars, it would be hardest for you to remember your fifth car. And there is nothing you can do about it because this is hardwired in the human brain. Again, it's a very well-known phenomenon. It's called recency-precency effect. People who study psychology, they study this law in great detail. But that stimulus alone has huge consequences on everything you do in sales and marketing. Now the next stimulus is visual. Now I can illustrate this very quickly with a couple of ways. But first is, if you look at the brain here, you would see that the optic nerve plugs here directly into the reptilian brain. So the first thing is, the input device known as the eye has a direct connection into the reptilian brain. So from an evolutionary perspective, it means we had eyes before we had a neocortex. This is a younger structure in the brain than the eye. The proof of that is that if you look at a frog or a snake, they have eyes and they don't have much of a neocortex. Right? Now the other thing that neuroscientists tell us is that the optic nerve is approximately 40 times faster than the nerve from the ear to the brain. So the optic nerve is a high bandwidth connection between the eye and the key decision maker in the brain, which are called the reptilian brain. Okay? So let me show you an ad which uses the visual stimulus to get to you. So see, they took our value proposition, we have a good bed, and they translated that into a visual stimuli. They show you what it is like to have a good bed. Now they use the second stimuli also in that ad, which is they use contrast. You see that, the contrast? Before, after. Noisy, quiet. The wrong bed, the right bed. All right, here's another example of a good value proposition shown visually. sharper than you think, and they are advertising for a gourmet knife, right? So there is a fly, the fly landed on the blade, and the fly just got cut in half. This is a visual demonstration of the value proposition for a very sharp knife. So they made it visual. And finally, we've spoken about emotions a lot in the last 2 days, but that reptilian brain can only be triggered by emotion. Now, the greatest expert on the role of the brain and emotion is a professor. I'm sure most of you know him. His name is Antonio Damasio. Damasio is head of the neuroscience department at UC Irvine in California. And in '95, Damasio wrote a book, which, if you are in neuroscience, I'm sure you've read it. This book is called Descartes' Error. I'm going to summarize this book in one sentence for you, in case you haven't read it. And Damasio said, we are not thinking machines that feel. We are feeling machines that think once in a while. We are feeling machines that think once in a while, right? So it's not like emotions are optional. No, no, no. We know that emotion is the basic fuel that is needed by the brain to make a decision. Why? Because there is no such thing as a rational decision. It does not exist. Why? Because this is an emotional processing machine. So what happened is rational thoughts is a byproduct of emotions, not the opposite. Again, you don't have to trust a guy who has a marketing background. You can trust a guy who has, you know, PhD in neuroscience and who is one of the smartest neuroscientists in the world. So again, this is something that most advertisers know. We all know that it's all about emotion, etc. But at the end of the day, everybody is looking for the best possible emotion, the strongest possible emotion, and the emotion that will trigger the decision as quickly as possible. So I'm going to show you a short ad, and I'm going to ask you what stimulus are triggered by that ad, actually. Let me show you that ad.
The polar ice cap is melting. Sea levels have risen 20 centimeters in the last 100 years. The polar ice cap is melting. We could be looking at a 3-meter rise over the coming century. We're not going to let this happen. Are we?
So what do you think? Do you think they went for the rational reasons why you should vote green, or do you think they made it emotional? Yeah, they go directly after your emotions, right? The way they do it is by using a baby. Now, how did they make it visual? Did they show you an Excel spreadsheet with a few equations and key to deviations of how the oceans are rising? No. You know, they go directly after your visual channel by showing you a baby. Beginning and end, they know you're going to go through that curve of attention retention, but they use artificially your own curiosity to help you stay at a higher level of attention retention. Because you can never get a flat response like that. In other words, you can never get people to be always attentive. Right? People will always have to get a little dip. But if you can get people engaged instead of having them go through that curve, they'll stay at a higher level of attention like this. Now, was it tangible or was it abstract? It's very tangible. It's one child in a water tank, right? Now, where was the contrast in this ad? Well, the contrast was in low water, high water. Breathing, not breathing. Life, death. And then finally, why is that triggering your sense of self-centeredness? Because this child could be saved, and it could be your child. So if it's your child, of course you will be concerned. Right? In fact, for your reptilian brain, it's even worse than your own child in that water tank. Guess who it is? It's us, right? Because the reptilian brain cannot differentiate between television and reality. Why? Because television was invented 60 years ago. So television didn't have enough time in evolutionary terms to make an impact on our brain. So when we see a sad movie, we know the hero is not going to die. So our neocortex says, no, I know the hero is not going to die. I know the hero made $20 million on that blockbuster movie. Right? But then your reptilian brain takes over and goes, no, the hero is going to die. I think I am the hero because of something in psychology called the ego. Right? And if I am going to die, I have to prepare my body for crying. So I'm going to accelerate the heart rate. I'm going to increase the blood pressure. And I'm going to prepare the lacrimal glands. And at that point, you can use all the rational thoughts in the world. You can say, no, I know the hero is not going to die because it's made in Hollywood, you know, it's movie, it's fake. I read in the newspaper that the guy was elected as governor of California. Why should I cry for him, right? It doesn't matter because your reptilian brain is made to believe and then you start crying. So again, this ad is effective. Why? Because it's using not one, but all 6 stimuli. In fact, that ad was so effective that they had to remove it. So, what we have done, what I have done, what my mission in life is that I have translated those 6 stimuli, which are all over the medical literature, into 4 business steps. So this is the end of the neuromarketing part, if you want, of my talk. And this is normally where I would go into the marketing side. And what I've been doing, and done that now for 12, 14 years, is we've translated that into 4 steps. The first step is the importance of diagnosing the pain of the prospect. And we need to do this because people are self-centered. So if people are self-centered, when they buy something, like if I buy a cup of coffee, I don't care about the person who sells me the coffee. I don't even care about the coffee. I only care about what the coffee will do to me. In other words, I am longing for that feeling of feeling good and relaxed and the smell of the coffee. Right? But the only way that people who sell coffee can impress upon me is if they really try to, before they sell me that cup of coffee, they really try to find out what motivates me, what kind of pain I have in my, between my 2 ears that is motivating me to buy that cup of coffee. But what happens is most companies, they start to sell their products too early and too soon without really truly understanding what their customers really want. In fact, what they want does not even matter. It's really what their pains are. So the 2 important words here are the diagnostic, which means understanding, and the pain, which means a very specific psychological process that is happening in the mind of the people who buy. The second step is the importance of differentiating your claims. In other words, today most likely, see, if you're selling water, this is what your clients see. They see a brand of water, they see another brand of water, and they don't see the difference between the 2. The problem in today's world is that product similarity is very, very high, and seeing from the shoes of the customers or the eyes of the customer, they cannot see the difference between that bottle of water and that bottle of water. So the job of smart marketing people is to enhance the contrast. Remember, we talked about that stimulus here. Because the reptilian brain loves contrast, the job of the smart marketers is to find a way to increase the contrast between this water and this water. So maybe one way to increase the contrast in this case would be to paint that bottle in blue when everybody else uses a transparent bottle for the water. Right? Now the problem, as you may know, is that today 98% of all websites start with the same sentence. 98% of all websites start by, "We are the leading provider of," yet blue apples. Everybody is the leading provider of blue apples. There's nothing unique when you say that. There is no contrast. So the job of the smart marketing people is to increase that contrast and to say, we are the only provider of, and then you have to create at least the perception that your apple is red. And that's the only red apple. Then the third step is about demonstrating the gain. In other words, it's to make sure that your customers will psychologically perceive that the value they receive from you is greater than the cost. Because whenever people buy something, they always buy it with the promise that they will gain something. Even if it costs them $5, well, I get a cup of coffee. So if I am buying a cup of coffee, the psychological process I have to go through into my head is, do I want to have the pain of opening up my wallet and putting $5 away from me, and in return to get the joy of a nice, warm, and great cup of coffee? So if I am truly convinced that that transaction of $5 versus a cup of coffee is good, then I will buy that cup of coffee. If that transaction is negative for me, like if the coffee becomes $10, the pain of the $10 now goes over the edge of what I would pay for a cup of coffee, I'm not going to buy it. So the job of smart marketing people is to make that gain equation understood by their customers in 3 seconds or less, and to do it to a brain that's 500 million years old. And you need to do this, again, because the reptilian brain loves tangible information. And the last step is, how do you need to deliver now your message to the reptilian brain? And to do that, you have to use all 6 stimuli. So again, my mission in life has been for the last 14 years to translate that into a business model. This is the model. As you see, I briefly described the 3 brains, then we went through the 6 stimuli, and from 6 stimuli we have deducted 4 steps: pain, claim, gain, reptilian brain, and that last step here is the language of the reptilian brain. So I published this in a book in 2002. That was the very first book on neuromarketing. Today we've sold over 100,000 copies of the book. The book is translated in 10 languages. We've trained over 24,000 people. This model got the American Marketing Association award in 2009, and that's the same award that was won by YouTube in 2007. So my mission in life now is, on my LinkedIn profile, it says I'm a neuromarketing evangelist, right? So I'm trying to help people understand what would be the value to have a model of marketing and sales which is anchored in neuroscience. So if now I go back to some of the limits of neuromarketing and compare it with the limits of applied neuromarketing. So first of all, the model is protected. I don't have a black box.
Would you like any questions? Because
yes, I'm done in 1 minute.
Great.
So, am I worried about protecting my black box? No, I've published the black box. Anybody can get it for $14.95. Right? So model is completely open. And that has some major benefits. First of all is, yes, it's completely ethical because now if you're the consumer and you're trying to protect yourself against people that are going to try to manipulate you, you can buy the book and then start to better understand your own nature. How do advertisers try to manipulate you to get to buy coffee even if you don't like coffee? Right? So the model is open, it's semi-empirical because again, some of it is based in the science of the brain, but then there is a number of assumptions that have been made in that model, and my purpose in life is to refine that model and make the model even better. Right? So is it B2B applicable? Yes, because you don't need to put people in an MRI. You can just use the general rules of how stimulus generates certain responses, because that's logical, it's all the medical literature, right? And we know that this stimulus at the end of the day will help your customer to say yes. So it's very applicable to B2B. Is it affordable? Well, the model is free, it's published, you can get it, cannot get cheaper than that. It's real-time testable. What I mean by this is, by the time you design your product, if your product meets this concept of applied neuromarketing, it will already be attractive to the reptilian brain. So it's instantly testable, if you want. Right? It's a model of predictability. So for example, if you do the packaging for an aspirin, right? If you have to do the packaging for an aspirin, would you use red as the color for this packaging? With what I told you about the reptilian brain. Think about it. What do you think is the meaning of the color red for the reptilian brain? Danger. So if you have a package to do for aspirin, would you put your aspirin in a red package? Most likely not. Why? Because aspirin, the value proposition that you want to convey is that if you have a headache, you take my aspirin, your headache will be gone. If you package it in red, do you think that's the message you're communicating? Probably not, right? So before even testing the color red, I would ask myself, would it be smart? In fact, if you look at most aspirin, they are labeled in either blue or white packages. Because blue and white evoke some kind of calm. Then, is it accessible? Well, I present it to you in 25 minutes. You don't need a PhD in neuroscience to understand it. Anybody can understand it. Again, we've trained 25,000 people on this model. Everybody gets it. You can be a CEO of a small company. You can be the VP of marketing of a large company. It doesn't matter what your label is. Everybody can understand it. It's simple. And then finally, is it actionable? Yes, absolutely. Again, the people that have been using our model for the last 14 years, they report some very strong findings. We've helped companies sell $300 million telecommunication devices. We've helped people sell proton therapy machines. It's 120 million euros machines. And they all use some of these concepts because it helps our customers understand their value proposition. Right? So I don't think there is a limit to what we can do with applied neuromarketing. The only limit is I would like to refine my model, so if anybody has suggestions on how we could do that, please take my card and give me a call. Okay? But thank you very much for your attention. I have one last slide. And do you have any questions?
Pompeo Fabra, the Universidad Barcelona. Is that correct? Sorry?
And sells rain. And sells rain too.
Okay, I'm sorry. And of course, sales brain. Questions? Not everybody at once.
Yes, I told you it was so simple that there is no question.
and maybe it's a bit further away, but would it make sense to say that, let's say, figurative art talks to, let's say, the most basic brain that we have, and modern art talks to more the neocortex?
I don't know.
That's what Antonio said.
That's right. He's in for the questions. He's doing the tough part. You go ahead.
Okay.
Well, I have a. I think art, as especially music, has a very interesting way of reaching the reptilian brain. In other words, art is one of those things that we can't really explain why it's that good and how it works. But I'm going to give you a side answer, and you'll tell me if I answered your question or not. But when you teach kids to remember the alphabet, you don't teach kids how to remember the alphabet by telling them A, B, C, D, E. You tell them, guess what? A song, right? In the US, the song they use is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Why? Because it's much harder to remember letters with sound than it is to remember music, right? So somehow, somewhere, that music, that rhythm, that form of art, if you want, has a direct impact on the reptilian brain, which makes it very appealing. So somehow, somewhere, I believe that art, in its best form, is reaching our brain in a way that we still cannot explain, but it's very profound.
In fact, also it's related to emotion. An art, for example, is related to emotion. Everything which creates an emotion generates adrenaline. And the adrenaline is necessary for the amygdala to really remember stronger and longer, right? The whole brain is using the amygdala as the first database to make any decision. Even before the cortex participates, the amygdala is invoked by the whole brain, right? So so everything which is simple and associated with emotions will generate adrenaline, will be faster and longer remembered.
You know, another thing that I've been trying to prove, so if there is any scientist in the room that could help me prove this, but my gut feeling is telling me that the subconsciousness resides more at the level of the reptilian brain than it resides at the level of the neocortex. This is kind of my gut feeling. I've spoken to a bunch of people about it, researchers at Stanford and San Diego University, etc. And they tell me that they also believe it, but nobody can prove it yet. But if we can demonstrate that the subconsciousness resides more at the level of the body, or the reptilian brain, than at the higher level cognitive functions, my model becomes even more interesting. Yes?
There's a writer, a neuroscientist, who writes about that all the time. It's called Oliver Sacks. I recommend it. Okay. So on music and brain.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
I've got a question for not everybody. I've got believing that not everybody reacts the same on stimuli.
That's right.
And as a marketeer, I want to segment.
Yes.
And how can I do that?
Well, I think yesterday we've had several talks where people were telling us that we are much more similar than we are dissimilar. Mm-hmm. So before doing all this segmentation later on, based on people, gender, age, and etc., at the end of the day, we're all human and we're all driven by our desire to survive, and it's all driven by the reptilian brain. Yeah. So before doing that segmentation, and I know that people in the B2C, they want to do that, right? In B2B, you don't have that much need for segmentation. It's still needed, but it comes much later, mm-hmm. right? But I would strongly encourage you to first look at the commonality based on the fear of people of dying, the need for survival, yeah. And then to go into deeper techniques of segmentations.
When you are looking to the whole brain, really it's very, very much easier to save money in marketing because you don't need so much segmentations. Because it's simple. It's going like it is playing to survive. And that changes a lot of things. It's a title, it's a title for newspaper. And working and directing to the whole brain, you may use the same ads for many segments that if you think in the cortex, you will do much different.
Talking about segmentation, a few months ago I was doing a presentation in New York, and it was the Association of Female Professionals. They were all CEOs of their own company, and they were the most powerful women in New York, right? So I'm starting my presentation, I talk about the reptilian brain, And one of them raised her hand in the back, and she went, "Is there a difference between men and female brain?" And I'm going, "Oh no."
Oh no.
And my presentation turned into a 3-hour lecture on the differences of brain between men and women. And if you're interested in this, that's one very obvious segmentation, right? There is one book that is really, really good. And the title of the book is kind of funny, but it's a very intelligent book, and it's written by a couple. They are both psychologists. It's Barbara and Alan Pease, and the title of their book is Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. So it's a very funny title, but it's an excellent book that talks about differences of brain in terms of gender. And it all goes back from our evolutionary roots, right? Because just a few generations ago, we were living in caves. And the job of the man was to keep the tribe at peace, or at war and eliminate the enemy, and to find food. So men, they communicate in terms of, where is the bear? Let's find the bear, let's kill the bear. Right? We don't talk about, hey, Antonio, how do you feel about going out and killing the bear today? No, we don't talk like that, right? Say, Antonio, let's kill the bear, right? So then, once we've detected where the bear is, our sight is much more precise than women in the center of the visual field. In other words, men can see further detail, but they don't have peripheral vision as good as women. Women can see on the side, men can see in the center. Now, what was the job of women? Their job was to keep the tribe at peace, to make sure everybody was happy. To do that, you cannot talk in terms of objective. You have to say, did you have enough food? How are things? So women have developed a much better capacity to communicate based on their emotional reading. Women, it's been proven, can read facial expression much better than men, for example. Right? So all these differences make for a very interesting segmentation. If half of your customers are male, the other half are female, read that book. You're going to love it.
Okay, we'll do that. Does it mean that a commercial or an advertisement is no need to explain anything? Just stay on the lower brain level. Is that your message, or is it?
No, my message is that if you do a commercial, you have to communicate that the value that they will receive is greater than the cost, without using words, by going directly through emotions, right? And by oversimplifying that value equation so that even the brain of a reptile can understand it.
So like the sports car that was pushed over the edge?
Yes.
It's a very simple example. There's nothing explained.
That's right.
That's powerful.
That is powerful because people get an emotion, my car, and it's tangible. In other words, all of a sudden they know what it means to have more energy. Yeah. So it's well explained in 30 seconds, no text.
But that's my question. Do you recommend, if anybody thinks of making a commercial, skip out all the explanation, the rationalization, stay on...
You go directly to the reptilian brain. Here's what's happening. If you think about the 3 levels of the brain, they all have a different agenda. So on one hand, your rational brain is trying to get you to go one direction. I'll give you an example. I am walking in front of a Porsche car dealership, right? I see the Porsche. So my reptilian brain goes, I would look good in that car. Maybe I wouldn't be single too long if I was driving one of those cars, right? And then my rational brain goes, I can't afford the mortgage. It's going to be way too expensive, and the maintenance is costly, and people are going to scratch it if I put it in my garage, etc. So one of your brain wants you to make one decision one way, the other brain wants to make the decision the other way. Now again, knowing what neuroscientists tell us about the prevalent role of the reptilian brain, you'd better start to sell to the reptilian as opposed to using more logic to try to reach the neocortex. It's like the difference between a decision influencer and a decision maker. The reptilian brain is the decision maker. The neocortex is just a decision influencer. So it doesn't mean that the reptilian always wins. It means it wins most of the time.
I'm just really thinking. Like
you need an aspirin.
Yeah, definitely. When I get I would think of these stories. Them, no doubt. People who say, "Well, my father, grandfather used to sell a lot of stuff back in the century or so and so." And what he already did was, what he already understood was, get acquainted with the customer, know his family, know.
So why do you need to do this from a reptilian perspective?
Now, my question is that the same? Is that the same thing? Like create in this lower brain, in this reptilian brain level. Okay, this is a friend.
Yes. Because here is what happens. Again, from an evolutionary perspective, just a few generations ago, the only way you and I could do some kind of business transaction was if you were belonging to the same tribe. In other words, Apache were making business with Apaches. So if you were really good at knitting clothes, I would, get a clothes from you, and in exchange, I would give you a horse. So we have a tendency to believe the people that belong to the same tribe that we believe. Right? So if I want to sell to you and you're Dutch, I should probably make the effort to speak to you in Dutch, because you're going to have an easier time to believe a Dutch person as you would a French guy. Right? So it's that notion of proximity. Similarity makes for likability, and the reptilian brain loves what looks similar to it. So that's why salespeople, they tell you that whenever somebody buys, if they don't buy the product, they buy me. And they're right because of that.
But is it too simple to say nothing has changed? Like
yes?
2 centuries ago, people were selling on the reptilian brain level. And with very complicated MRI scans and EEG scans, people do the same thing now.
In other words,
well, I'm a bit flabbergasted.
No, I mean, 200 years ago is 10 generations. 10 generations haven't had enough time in evolutionary terms to make an impact on our brain. And now we had this revolution that happened 10 years ago, which is called the internet. So now a lot of business transactions are made over the internet, and people find it very hard to sell on the internet. A lot of my clients, that's what they do. And they say, I don't understand, why is it so difficult for us to buy on the internet? Of course, what kind of reptilian connection do you have with your customers when they are buying by putting their business card, their credit card information on a website? So they really have to trust you when they get on the site, etc. So we have a lot of people that are calling us right now, and they say, how can I build intimacy with my customer knowing that I will never see them? That the only thing they will see is my website, which right now is full of text, and at the end of the day, I want them to input their credit card number on my site. That takes a lot of confidence from the client to do that.
This Web 2.0 and the point that Patrick just said is very important, because really in Web 2.0 neuromarketing is extremely important. What we do really, the people that we are in Twitter and working hard in that and so on, we are creating trust. We are putting contents on the web. We are making friends. And sometimes we may do some business. But it's in this way, not in the other way around. The way first is to interact, we know each other, we create familiarity. I retweet your tweets, I like your contents, I say hello, have a nice week, and so on. So that is what makes really closer, no? Belonging to the same tribu, right? That's very important. It's the same issue. And another thing I wanted to say is when make a presentation just with images, you will be looking at me. The whole brain will have an opportunity to understand something what is happening, right? Change many things.
I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Facebook just went public a couple of days ago, right? What was the valuation? 60 billion, something like that? I can't remember the exact number. But what do you think is the promise of Facebook? They'll give you the promise of extending your tribe, right? That's the idea. And they went public at that market cap based on that they found almost an artificial way of making your tribe really big. Nobody knows how they're going to make money out of this, but this is the United States.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? One last question. Yes, please.
You see a lot of companies fighting the price battle. So in the end, you have to quote the price. How would you see pricing strategy compared to the story you tell?
Well, price is right. Price is part of the equation, right? In other words, when the value that you offer is not differentiated versus your competitors, then the only thing you can fight with is with the lower cost. So people are trying to make the balance go like this by artificially fighting that battle of cost, which is a very dangerous game. I mean, of course, you don't want to do it, right? So I would not recommend that you fight the battle of cost, but that you fight the battle of value. And more importantly, that you make an effort in communicating your value proposition to the reptilian brain. In other words, do not make your value proposition too complex to understand, because then your customers will need to have an act of faith in the value that they will receive. Right? So oversimplify your value proposition. And then do not discount. Because think about it. Is it always the cheapest one that wins? No, because Mercedes sells cars that are expensive. Louis Vuitton exists. People drink Cristal. You're not wearing the cheapest shoes you could buy. So because of that, Don't fight the battle on cost. Fight the battle on value.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.